To her? Yeah.
Yeah, to the city clerk, yes, sir.
And she'll distribute that
Yes, sir.
to you. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I do see that I have one other individual to talk on something other than oil and gas, and that's Eric Verlo.
Thank you. My name is Eric Verlo, and I came to you because I think that we have a problem in common. We live in a city that doesn't really have a free press. We have a daily paper that appears to be pretty biased in what it reports on, and its opinions certainly, but even what it reports on. And I know that's a problem for me as a citizen because I'm not seeing a multiplicity of views, but I think I know that's a problem for you as politicians, because it would seem that if you're facing re-election, you kind of have to go with what the main paper in town is dictating. Because if they don't like some action of yours, they're going to paint it in a bad light. And so I was hoping that you could think of something to do about the Gazette. What do we do about the Gazette? And maybe you can censure it. Issue public censure to the Gazette that they can't be repeating this behavior. And very specifically, what came to mind, we normally have a gentleman here who sits here and sort of reports on what happens at these meetings, and I've noticed that he's a lot of the participation that I've seen, he has omitted. But in specific, a couple weeks ago, he did a puff piece about the Drake coal plant. And he talked about Newman filtering systems and how they might have to take their jobs elsewhere because the city council was squabbling. And I wonder, that was actually, it was a long piece. He didn't mention the fact that the jobs that Newman was threatening to take were actually installers who would probably stay in the city anyway. But what he also didn't elaborate on was what the squabble is about. And I'd like to ask you, is that what you guys are doing? Is that what you do up here? You squabble? I mean, are you happy to be represented that way? And for me, it's more pertinent because his colleague, who sat in for him in one of the meetings 4 weeks ago, reported and did a story about a meeting that we had here that discussed oil and gas fracking. And he discussed your decision to move to look further at regulations, but then he didn't say why. He didn't say that there was any public input. He omitted to mention that the room was full of people who were opposed to fracking. He omitted to mention there were 24 people here. He didn't mention any of the 18 people who spoke, anything that they said. And in fact, he didn't even mention the word fracking. I did a word search. No fracking, and not even, because we all know that's sort of a slang term, he didn't even mention hydraulic fracturing. No, I believe we talked about that for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Wouldn't you say that we talked about fracking for 2.5 hours? And how can we have a newspaper that isn't going to tell the public about that? I mean, I think it's very distressing. I don't know if we're going to make any progress in the city if we've got a one-sided news system. So I would urge you to think of something. If it wasn't Daniel's fault, maybe his editors are changing his story. Then can't we expect him to maybe stand up to his editors and say, no, I was there. This must be reported as is. I mean, until then, if he's not going to act like an adult, let's make him sit in a high chair until he figures out that he's got to do his job like a responsible adult. All right, thank you.
Mr. Verlo, one of probably the very first lessons I learned on getting elected to council is I have absolutely no control over what's printed in the Gazette. And I know, and it's that pesky U.S. Constitution that gets in the way of that, so.
Mr. President,
Mr. Herpin.
John Weiss, who works for the Independent, recently took a tour through China, and I had previously gone to China just before him, so we kind of corresponded. And it's interesting that he sent back, as he's a newspaper guy, he said he met some folks in China who work for newspapers. He said, in China, the press fears the government. In the United States, the government fears the press. And I don't think we want to be the government that wants the press to fear us.
Lisa?
Mr. President, can we ask our communication staff to introduce herself and remind the audience the communication tools that council finally has now to get correct information out to the public?
Vicki, come on up.
Council, citizens. I'm Vicki Gomes. I started July 2nd. I am council communications person now.
Could you just relay information as far as social media, how you're releasing information, you're tweeting during meetings, and also with our newsletter, if you don't mind
Yes,
elaborating?
we are tweeting the meetings as of a couple months ago. We are now on Facebook. We are photographing council at events. We're doing press releases as well, out to the media. We are starting a newsletter, hopefully in November, out to constituents so they know what's going on in council.
Thanks, Vicki. Okay. Like I said, I have several individuals signed up to speak on oil and gas. The first person I have is Laura.